I'm Eric Avisar. I'm a senior customer success manager here at Fuel Cycle, and super happy to be here with Robin Ryden, consumer insights manager at Carhartt.
Hi, I'm Robin. So I have spent nearly 2 decades at Carhartt, and you might know us for more than the beanie, hopefully. Bib overalls and premium workwear for men and women. I'm on the product insights team, and I've spent most of the 17 years hearing the good, the bad, and the ugly about how gear can be made better for the customer.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I know you've worked at Carhartt for a very long time now, Robin, and like you said, you've heard some very interesting opinions. And I guess, in addition to kind of Carhartt's product history, can you share some background with us on your research history, particularly on the market research side?
Yeah, so nearly 2 decades. I'm old. I started at Carhartt and we had paper surveys. Before, pre-digital was scary. It was a new frontier. And at that time, we were doing a lot of AAU studies. We had a panel, 50,000 people coming in fresh-eyed. I was like, that's a lot of people to talk to. The completion rate of 50,000 was low. We did trend research, competitive research, so it was kind of sporadic. It was, lower engagement. And right then was the time when we said, how about we do some product testing? So I was actually hired as the field testing intern, and they kept me. I must have done something right. But as we looked at those different disparate methodologies, we kind of said, this doesn't feel efficient, and I do enjoy efficiency. So that was kind of the impetus of communities, MROCs. Our team went out, looked at the landscape at the time, and we funded our first MROC, and thank God, I would not look back. It brought so many methodologies together, and it really created this authentic connection with our consumers that you just weren't having with a low response rate 50,000 member panel. And from that, we realized, we have a chance to broaden this, to knit it together better,
right,
and to also share more behind the scenes from Carhartt. And so it really grew our lens of how we could interact with our consumer. And so part of that was, okay, they want more from us, we want more from them, but we want to be authentic. How do we keep that going? And so part of it was, okay, sharebacks, right? And giving them a little peek into how their results are being used and trying to give a little bit of personality through this community space. After 3 years with our first platform, we kind of got to this speed bump, right? And we realized we're lacking some efficiencies. This took us to a really great place, but there's so much more we can do. A lot of people love Carhartt, and when you're having a community, there's this sense of transparency that you're trying to funnel. And we realized that we were missing some of the lubricant to make the methodology seem more seamless for the participants. Mm-hmm. So we went out.
Went shopping.
We went shopping, yep. We found Fuel Cycle. And part of that was when we were talking to them, they were actually really great in understanding where we were coming from and understanding that need for community to really build the base for a lot of great methodologies. And we saw a lot more efficiencies after, it was 8 years, right? It's
been a while.
We're hitting our 10-year anniversary soon.
Yeah. It's been quite the long time. We've loved partnering with Carhartt for so long, and you guys have such an amazing history of working with us, I think, in large part because of the member value proposition, right? Mm-hmm. Not only closing the feedback loop, letting people know how their insights are impacting Carhartt's business decisions, but I think your members feel very loud and heard when you're posting discussion board topics based on things that they say, right? Not mm-hmm. just what the stakeholders at Carhartt are saying, but really allowing members to kind of, have an influence on methodologies and studies that are fielded going forward. But in terms of once you started working with us, Robin, how did we really, join your research endeavors?
Like I said, it created more efficiencies, and at that point, we finally had a great segmentation. Mm-hmm. We had a typing tool, and Fuel Cycle said, we can integrate that for you so that you know who you're talking to. And I said, this is we're leaping ahead so far from this anonymous 50,000 user panel that we started with, where we had to re-ask the same demographics and the same behavioral questions. Now we finally could add that and screen all of our community members. And then on top of it, there's I call it like the spine of the community, the P2 engine, where any question we've ever asked in a survey, if that's a critical data point that we want to continue to leverage, we build that in as a profiling point, and then that sits on top of the knowledge that we have from the typing tool and the segment that they've also fallen into. So it's kind of like having a smart Rolodex, remembering conversations that you've had with your consumers so that you don't have to reintroduce yourself because they feel like they've already been on this brand journey with you, and for you to kind of come off target and feel like they have to reintroduce themselves to you again. You lose some of that seamlessness and that integrity and authenticity with the relationship that you're trying to form. And so Fuel Cycle solved that for us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And I think what I loved hearing, Robin, from our time working together is, how you've increased the engagements. I believe when you first started working in the MROC space, you were launching about 2 activities per month or so, right?
Yeah.
2 to 4, and then what did it go up to kind of on average after working with Fuel Cycle?
Yeah, so we were at 8. And so I'm gonna say, numbers don't matter, right? Quality matters.
Yes.
A lot of it was sharebacks. A lot of it was saying, we really value what you're giving us, and for all those decks that we've all created that we're so proud of, and then it might kind of go to a little bit of a graveyard, the perfect moment was sharing some of that back with our community to say, we spent hours polishing that data point you gave us. We picked 20 of the quotes from the 200 of you that participated. Your voice is literally we are the shepherds of your voice. It is coming to the different audiences that we have internally. We truly care about what you said. It's not going out into the ether. We are shepherding it and stewarding it and putting the nice ribbon on it. And then we also share the good and the bad because of Fuel Cycle. Obviously not the most proprietary, but we try to make it clear that we want to hear the constructive feedback, because I remember my first year at Carhartt when we were hard copy panel days, we're doing an iHut, and a woman emails me and she says, I'm product testing a new pair of shorts for you, and they really didn't work. But do you need me to say they were good in the survey? The paper copy survey that might have given her, paper cuts, but whatever. And I said, no, we really want to get better. The gift you're giving us is the honesty to have a chance to improve, so that when you go shopping for pants or shorts in the future, you have a good experience, and that you then tell someone you had a good experience. This doesn't help any of us. I'm not getting graded on how many positive comments I got in my survey, but that made me think the community that we have and sharing back that we heard your negative feedback as well as your positive reinforces that we are open to both streams. We want both of those streams of communication with you, and we use both to keep evolving our products.
100%. Yeah, I think the engagement that you've gotten from your members has been so critical to getting, making people feel comfortable with sharing their true opinions, their true insights, and that certainly takes time, and we've been able to cultivate that through the community space. So I know we've been able to increase engagements, but what about the methodologies that you've been able to launch in the community?
Yeah, so as a fellow creative artist, of course, consumers want to literally create with us, which is great. So concept testing was one of the stopgaps to give them more of an outlet, to see even more behind the scenes, and to say finally, why are you putting a hammer loop there? So many comments about where the hammer loop goes. I will have it on my grade marker at some point. Both sides is the answer, both sides. But so concept testing is really the new frontier for us. We've been working on it heavily now for about 2 to 3 years, right. Streamlining the process and making sure that we talk with our designers and we actually integrate them into the process, and we make them join the community at various touch points throughout the research. But we also say, Bob, who from X study, guess what? He's seen your concept. He had this feedback, and Linda and Jane saw it too. And then they kind of go, oh, yeah, I remember that. And they have more of a connection and empathy because we brought them along for the journey. But so concept testing, we cover many different topics and use cases. I don't know how many are familiar with that Carhartt launched the Rework resale website. That was part of a concept test to understand how Carhartt could meet the sustainability need where the consumer was at. And it landed with that. A resale website made a lot of sense and would really drive the needle for many consumers, both new and old. And we've concept tested the heated vest that launched last year, very new offering for our brand, more on that innovation side than the renovation side, but still the consumers had a lot of opinions on, well, your cotton, your brown duck, what are you doing with tech? And we're like, yeah, what are we doing with tech? What's authentic to you? Tell us, right? Like help guide us so that we show up in an authentic way for you and that we both can noodle on this together. And also the beanie. I'm gonna guess that many of you have seen the beanie, maybe your favorite barista, every coffee shop I stop at in the local Detroit suburbs, I see the beanie. I own 55.
It's a great collection right there.
55 beanies. It's a good thing that I have a head for hats. It's really good.
Yes, I wish I could say the same for myself, but hey, I'm still excited for the heated vest. You know, I've always been a big fan of heated car seats, so I can only imagine how much I would love a heated vest. So, no, that's amazing innovation work that we've seen. But, you know, talk to us a little bit more about, you know, that iconic Carhartt beanie. Robin, how does Carhartt run concept testing for that product?
So I've seen a couple other sessions. I'm just going to say qual and quant, they go together, right? And so even before we get to concept testing, we've used other methodologies to build into the qual space, and we're fans of design frameworks. So we've already given that to the designer so that they know the general ideal experience benefit areas to target. So they use that to then come up with their concepts. So it's all consumer-led from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then we partner with them closely to wordsmith it, to make it easier to access for the survey taker, right? We're trying to give them an easy way to give us feedback and in a succinct way share the general idea. And so with the beanie, you know, it's potentially hitting a little bit of a saturation point. Mm-hmm. And we said, well, what's the business question? We clearly do have one, so let's articulate it clearly. And it was, okay, how do we take some of the congestion away from that style? How do we diversify? How do we evolve it and make sure that we're not just resting on our laurels? 135 years this year, by the way, so want to make sure that we have some newness. So with the beanie, we had 7 different consumer-led design created concepts that we shared back with our call it the crew, our insights community. And we said, you know, take a look. We didn't share obviously all, a little bit of sequential monadic happening there behind the scenes.
Right.
And then we just had them rate them across the metrics that we feel matter to that business objective, right? And at the end of the day, because of fuel cycle and because of knowing who we're talking to, we can then also segment it out and say, which concepts are winning overall, but which concepts are doing something for maybe an underserved segment? Which concept is maybe too close into the original? So we also, of course, have a benchmark, like a control, and that was the original A18, the style number for it. And just figuring out, like, what can each of these concepts do for us? They can, generally, if they're all good, they can each do something, but maybe something different, right? And so that's where fuel cycle comes in and really helps us understand that we're talking to the right person, mm-hmm. and that because they've seen that we value their feedback, they know that we want the truth. And I feel we're getting deeper and richer insights from them. And my favorite part is when they give us allegories or similes and they say, oh, that's, you know, that would make my head feel like it's in a vice. Like the richness of those quotes, because they know that I won't delete them, they didn't offend my sensibilities. Those are the memorable quotes that go into the deck and that become a little extra sticky for the designer to remember.
Right. Yeah, no, I think when we were preparing for this presentation, Robin, one of the most interesting things that you told me was that, you know, concept testing is not siloed by any means, right? Like there's a high level of visibility into the research that you're running with your design team and with stakeholders as a whole. And I think a key to that is just, like you said, going beyond the quant side of things, gathering those open ends, because you mentioned the why is so important, and really taking that to the next level and providing that context that teams need to you know, make confident decisions. So I know you mentioned you know, a little bit about how profiling and, you know, understanding who you're talking to, which members you're bringing in is super helpful for concept testing and for research as a whole. But can you tell me here a little bit more about, you know, how fuel cycle fits into the concept testing process at Carhartt, and you know, how your team views the strategy overall as a whole?
Sure, it's a strong methodology. It is one of many, right? Layering it throughout the development cycle seems to really have been the richest for us, and being able to iterate quickly with fuel cycle has been a really good benefit. And then, hold on, I lost my train of thought. Stopping at the station is picking it up, we're okay. So with the beanie example, for instance, we could go back to them and we could say, we're now into the product testing phase, and we didn't have to screen them again. We saw how they answered in the concept test. We saw the richness of their insights and their open ends to determine, do you already sound like the right person to be a part of now the iHut, and as we call it, the field test. And so once again, we're not asking them to re-qualify themselves. We're saying, you took part in the concept test. We're on the next stage of development. You're on the caboose with us, to continue with the train metaphor, right? And we're like, do you want the product to test it? And we're like, it's an early prototype. It's okay if you don't like it, but we believe you gave great insights and that you're a really strong person to continue to help co-develop this with us. And they trust us because they've seen the transparency throughout the community over the years, that they then understand, once again, this is a creation moment. It is not make or break for us. We want just the truth of it. And that, once again, like deeper and richer insights.
Yeah, we're so happy we've been able to provide those richer and deeper insights, also at a much faster scale, right? Being able to collect that data, sometimes in a matter of hours. The speed to insights is definitely a huge part of the market research online community advantage. And I feel like you've given us so much detail, Robin, in terms of the process that Carhartt has taken in terms of the undertaking of concept testing. But of course, I'm sure many of us would be curious to hear as well, what are some of the key insights and takeaways that these concept tests have provided your team, and how they've influenced Carhartt's business decisions?
Yeah. Well, they build more empathy. Like, even if the first go isn't quite right, the fact that you're getting the richness from a concept test and then help the designer have more empathy for their next iteration, it just ends up strengthening the total outcome. And like I said, with the segmentation layered on top of the community, knowing who we're talking to makes us have a better strategic decision-making capability to decide which one to go forward with. I mean, they might all score highly on the top two box, but with whom? And to what end will moving the needle with that segment help the brand?
Yeah, no, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of building empathy. That can lead to building the brand in the process. And I think we've seen some amazing results there, Robin. So I guess, if you were to, talk to someone who's starting out running concept testing for the very first time, what are some of your pieces of advice? And I will actually move on to some of your bullets here.
Start early. It takes time. If you want to iterate, not just validate, you need the time to give your team the feedback so that they can go back, have more empathy and a little bit more refinement as they go to level 2. So the example here, we did some t-shirt concept testing with graphics. Some of these didn't score well. They scored very poorly, in fact. And the timing for this was so close to production, they could only cut the poor scores. They couldn't go back and tweak them and come back with a stronger offering. And we cover so many different areas of insights. We knew that there was a theme and that some of these had viability if they could just nail the theme and the essence of that category of graphics. So not to pick on the man in the middle, but the cartoony guy, he didn't deliver. But there was a need, and we saw that trending, so I would have loved for them to have had enough time to go back and take another stab at a logo cartoony iteration that just wasn't that guy, to just see if we could just do something that would have met that need.
Carhartt Cartoons has a ring to it, but didn't quite pan out on the design.
No. Okay, so the benchmark. So in school, you think 90%, that's an A, that's great. It's not the same with concept testing. You need to know where your level is. And for expanding the line of the beanies, that was an easier one for us. We're like, okay, it's a hat. It's original because it's growth off of this one. It was more difficult when we were looking at the heated vest because you're not matching the form. It's not doing the same job as another vest. It's not about that need. And so we actually had a lot of internal debate, which is great. It's good to not always know the answer because then you're surfacing and getting everyone's buy-in to figure out the best benchmark. And we actually came to the point and said, base layer. It's probably a base layer that might be replaced by a heated garment, not another vest. And so thinking through that stage is really critical. And there's also an alternative. If you get to the point where you're like, this is so innovative, there is no benchmark, you could, at the very least, you can average the scores of the concepts tested to at least create the range of, is it performing better than the average of the concepts or worse than the average of the concepts?
100%. And I think when I'm having, calls with my clients, there's so much eagerness from my clients to say, we want benchmarks, we want comparative norms, right? And to develop those benchmarks that you feel confident in, that's an example, I think, where patience really pays off, right? Taking the time to run studies, understand what you're measuring against, and giving it time to create that benchmark that you feel confident in. So with that, Robin, did you find it fairly difficult or easy, or how would you describe the level of difficulty in creating those benchmarks that your wider team felt confident in measuring against?
It's still an ongoing topic. We're a little bit of a unicorn. People at first like, well, you're apparel, and then you go, no, we're functional apparel. We have pockets, even for the ladies. We believe in pockets. And so setting a benchmark for that merge point of apparel that means something because you're presenting yourself as part of your identity, but it's also a tool, it's hard. They're not pre-built out there, right? It's just a little bit, it's a much different beast than CPG to some degree. So it's okay to be a little bit messy, and eventually, we started running some correlation to figure out in-market success versus concept tests, and some of those things are just very brand specific, and it's okay to be messy in the beginning. You'll get there.
Absolutely, yeah. And then I know you also mentioned the importance of gauging the correct metrics.
Yeah, we have a great licensing team, footwear, eyewear, bags, cooler bags, and that team also works with us, and they said, well, we have a new concept. It's for a premium line of cooler bags. And we said, great, new territory, let's talk about it. Basically, it's a big walking pocket, right? And we're like, we can talk pockets, it's fine. And they said, well, we want to make sure that we have the name right. It's really a naming test. And we're like, great, we can still do that. Our community is ready to talk about anything. And then as we're looking at the common metrics, we're like, well, okay, just because we were in love with these for apparel doesn't necessarily mean that they're always going to translate to every business question. So as we talked through it with our partner on the marketing team, they said, no, you don't really have the right metric. And I said, you're right, we don't. And so it's okay to add one to make sure that you're gauging the intent of the name or the product or the service that you're giving, right? Like it's fluid.
Yeah, that flexibility in terms of gauging the correct metrics, that can certainly pay huge dividends in the long run. And then on the qualitative side, would love to hear your thoughts there, Robin.
Concept testing is not just about the metrics. Like, get them right, have a benchmark, give your consumers a chance to tell you why they rated it a certain way, because at the end of the day, it doesn't help a designer by saying, this was horrible. What about it was horrible or unappealing? What about it was great? If there were two concepts that had really strong highs, also really low lows, well, how do we merge all that together to an even stronger concept? And so the example here, the one in red, they explain that as we proposed this Sandline beanie, which by the way, comes out end of this year, they said, I don't think that the interior lining will stretch with my head. I believe the exterior will keep stretching like it always has, but I think you're gonna give me a tight lining. That's something that the designer now has empathy for, that the raw materials designer knows that they have to actually source a different lining fabric than the one that they thought could work that we have in our jackets. That's helpful, and that gives you a stronger product launch.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. That goes back to Qual giving that why to design teams and getting to that next level and getting the insight they need to, of course, develop a better product there. So. I wanted to also kind of talk about, know who you're talking to. That's something we've touched on with the P2 engine, profiling, your typing tool, all those things kind of tie together.
Yep, and I will say, people ask this from time to time, well, what's your incentive structure? It's okay to have low to no monetary incentive in a community. In fact, I'm really good with it because as the manager of the crew, I hear sometimes saying, I want a point system, I want something tangible, and I go, but you might be in it for the wrong reasons if you want a high incentive in that way. If you believe in our brand and our brand could do better for you and you want to know that we value your opinion, you're here for the right reason, and you will more likely give me the richness and the good illustrative quotes that will make my report than the person who's so focused on, why didn't I get $5 for completing this?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, everybody loves a gift card, of course, but I think when you're able to close the feedback loop and again, let people know how their insights are impacting decisions, and I think Carhartt taking it to the next level and even launching research activities based on feedback that they've received, that's a true game changer from my view. That's how you really keep people in your community for months and years as opposed to days and weeks, especially as there's so much competition for eyeballs on the internet. So I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of not only concept testing, but also running it from a community perspective. So with that, Robin and I will be at the Fuel Cycle booth afterwards, giving out some of those famous Carhartt beanies. We would love to talk with you there afterwards. And thank you so much, Robin, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you.